Welcome to another episode of ShortCasts with Ryan. Today is the second episode of the series where I talk about the lessons from Factfullness by Hans Roslling. This is a book that is my favorite personal book and also a book recommended by Bill Gates and is absolutely worth the read. You should check it out. I'll have the link through Amazon, but check out and stay tuned for the rest of this podcast. Why is it that we don't learn more in school? Why is it that school teaches us to memorize answers, but doesn't teach us how to think? These questions are some I think of frequently, and part of the reason why Factfullness by Hans Roslings is my favorite book, and the reason for this episode. Factfullness teaches you how to process information, how to understand the world around you, and how to think. We call this a framework, a mental model, and to some extent, a worldview. This book teaches you how to interpret reality, watch out for your own mental pitfalls, and escape the daily bombardments from deceptional media. Today, I'm bringing you 3 more lessons about our instincts and ways to change the way you think of the world for the better. You can hear the first 3 lessons in episode 24. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Someone said that or something like it, I'm pretty sure. This lesson from Factfullness is called the fear instinct. Similar to the negativity instinct, this is our tendency to not only notice, but react to things that spark our sense of fear or fright. It's the reason why news headlines so often grab our attention and make us think the world is falling apart. This instinct makes a ton of sense if you look at it from our ancestors' perspectives. It helped us survive when we were constantly looking for threats, trying to avoid dangers, and constantly reacting with fear and adrenaline to many things. But the fears that once kept our ancestors alive now keep our journalists employed. News and media often use headlines that are frightening to us. These headlines catch our attention and evoke an emotional response. To our human nature, things that are fearful and frightening can often be found to be more interesting. One thing to keep in mind is that what makes us scared and frightened is often very little danger to us, and people let their fear hold far greater value than the risk their fear actually represents. We may be scared of snakes, when we're almost never really in danger from dying of snakebite. We fear plane crashes when planes are actually far safer than riding in a car. We can be terrified of sharks when there's really a bigger chance of you getting killed by a cow. The point, almost all of our fears are not actually a threat to us. To better control your fear instinct, know that news and media will try to show you things that are frightening and evoke a fearful response. If there is something you fear, like dogs, sharks, or snakes, etc., actually look up how dangerous your fear actually is, and usually you will find you don't have anything to worry about. The second lesson for this episode, and the 5th from this book, is called the size instinct. This is another lesson, similar to the straight line instinct from the previous episode, that affects the way we interpret numbers and data. What if I told you that last year, 4.2 million babies died? Shocking, terrible, heartbreaking, right? It truly is. But at the same time, it's great. Because that number is actually 500,000 less than the year before and the lowest number of deaths for babies ever. If you compare that number to the 14.6 million babies that died in 1950, you'd think we're on a great trend. We've saved 66% more of the dying babies per year since the 1950s. The size instinct tells us why we think numbers and data are so dramatic. Often, media will use standalone numbers paired with the negativity and fear instinct to evoke a strong emotional response, like the 4.2 million dying babies. What we rarely see and only few understand is that numbers and statistics are typically only valuable when compared to other similar numbers. One thing to keep in mind, media will continue to use very large or very small standalone numbers to get your attention and promote a narrative. Always be suspicious of when you hear or see a piece of data that stands alone or is seemingly very large or very small. Usually, when you compare that number to a trend or to other numbers, or turn that number into a rate, you will find more truth in that this number was used to promote a certain narrative. A great thing to do is to turn any number or data point into a rate and compare. Almost every number you hear can usually be divided and turned into a rate and brought to better comparison using a per person scale. So vaccines per person, nurses per person, children per person. We can usually turn large numbers into a rate, and then these rates are more comparable and more representative of the truth. Always be skeptical of standalone numbers and never forget to compare them. The last lesson I'll be talking about today is one of my favorite lessons from this book, and something that often comes to mind when I hear people talking, telling stories, and trying to argue. It's called the Generalization Instinct. This is our tendency and instinct to generalize. To take one example from a category or group and automatically think that everyone or everything else in that category or group is the same. Picture a homeless person. Did you picture a gorgeous, tall, blonde girl in her 20s? Probably not. But I bet what you did picture is a preconception of what a homeless person looks like to you. We all do this about almost everything. Even worse, we often will let these groups or generalizations affect how we think people from groups behave. You may generalize all homeless people to be jobless, have addictions, to beg. But this simply is not true. You may generalize all CEOs to be wealthy, cruel, money hungry, or selfish. Also not true. The point is, we make tons of imaginary categories, titles, buckets, groups, like I explained with the gap instinct. But then we try to force everyone into these groups with generalization. We hear about it in politics all the time. Someone on the Republican right saying, "You're just another one of those social leftists, blah, blah, blah." And the same goes with those on the left talking about the right. Now, I'm not saying you should never generalize. Generally, it can be a good tool. But what you should look out for is when you or others try to think and say that everyone in this one group is like everyone else in that group. If you say every homeless person, every Republican, or every Democrat is the same, you need to understand the vast differences between individuals in the same group, and also the vast similarities between individuals from different groups. One thing to watch out for here is the power of stories and examples. If we hear a vivid story of a Democrat pulling down a Confederate statue, we will remember that story, and media is able to build a narrative for that. But what you have to watch out for is when you or others assume that every Democrat wants to pull down statues because of that one extreme Democrat. Beware of stories being used as examples. They can often represent outliers and not the majority of a group. The awareness of generalization instinct, combined with the gap instinct, I hope can teach you to challenge the groups and categories you try to put people or things in. Challenge how you unintentionally or perhaps wrongfully generalize people and groups, and challenge you to look at the world through a more factful lens. Thank you for tuning into that episode of ShortCast with Ryan on the Real with Ryan YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed the lessons brought to you by Hans Roslings' Factfullness. I highly recommend picking up this book yourself. I'll have the link in the link to Amazon in the description, and I can't recommend this book enough. Thank you for watching. Feel free to check out my new website. It's called realwithryan.com. It has the links to both the podcast and the YouTube channel, as well as my media, and you can follow me along on your media of choice, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, you name it, I'm there. So thank you for tuning in. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment if you want to see more. And as always, thanks for keeping it real with Ryan.